1800, 90% of the world's population worked in agriculture. Come 2000, it was less than 1% in the United States. We're going to talk about today how we went from there to here and where we're going on further. Welcome to Geopolitics with Tyberius D. I am also Tyberius D, and we're joined by my content director, Justin, to help me guide me through this wonderful conversation. We'll get some intro music here before it's too terribly long, but we're still going through a phase. I hope you all check the announcements that will be uploaded on the last episode. So, Justin, how you doing?
Hello. I'm all right.
So,
chilling.
Understand.
Uh,
Justin's been a great
ready
help.
to go.
Yeah, Justin's been a great help. He is now part of Team Geopolitics with Tiberius D, where he is now the content director. So basically, he helps me produce this content for you guys, go through it, and you guys, if you check the announcement, you'll know where we're going. Without further ado, let's talk Industrial Revolution. So how did we get from basically most people living on subsistence farming to the modern era where literally, folks like my family are literally one of 3 million of a country or a population of like 320 million. The long and the short is that we had industrial revolutions. We changed how we operate from time to time. And unlike what we saw many, many times beforehand with technological renovations and changes, is that this was fundamental in how everything operated. So let's set the stage. The Industrial Revolution is largely seen as this giant leviathan of just change and more change, which is kind of true. But most of the people I engage with in, political science and economics divide this out into 3, if not 4, industrial revolutions. Some of them overlap a little bit. Let's not be long here. But, Justin, what is the first industrial revolution?
What is the first? Oh, geez. Put me on the spot. I don't think I actually know the first industrial revolution, to be honest with you.
Somebody hasn't been listening to me. Okay.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so I kind of tripped him up here because he was actually supposed to ask me that question, but we're still working on a little bit of the new platform. The first industrial revolution is kind of known as the power revolution, and that is basically how do you get power? The vast majority of human history is literally muscle power. It is using a horse or a mule or an ox or what have you in combination with human hand power. That is how you did anything from build canals to dig ditches to build enormous buildings. And every now and again we'd have something like a rope and pulley system that'd be able to use that. But power came from the flesh. Well, the first industrial revolution changes all that. And we call this largely the steam engine. Now, this wasn't the only way to do this, but this was the big way to do this, the way that kind of changed everything. And this literally kind of takes off in the late 1700s. Now, unironically, the steam engine's been around for a very long time. The Romans actually had a couple, but they never used it because they didn't need it. They thought that having the multitudes of slave labor that they wouldn't need to build out an industrial infrastructure. It was really, steam engines were trinkets, unironically. And so they never used that to develop any kind of industrial system that they could have done that we have in the last 200 years. So in the late 18th century, 1700s, is that people start to figure out how to make steam into power. And basically, as you burn some kind of fossil fuel, usually coal is where it started out with, you boil water, and that makes a crap ton of power because of the expansion of the water into steam. It means that water will expand 1,100 times, generate a lot of pressure and a lot of power, and move things in certain directions. The first things were just, very rudimentary things. You could basically build a steam jet, which would push things. From there on, you get into valves and levers, and this actually starts where the second industrial revolution kind of takes off from. But we'll tackle that in a second. But the big thing is getting power, and this will kind of come full circle with the internal combustion engine, where we get things like petroleum. So that is power in a nutshell. That's the first one. It's just basically changing the fundamental way that we get energy into doing what we are doing. So, Justin, do you have any questions before we move on?
Yeah, a couple quick ones.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
I posit to you, what were the first cultures to really largely adopt this steam power? Because it had been a thing before, but someone had to be the one to be like, hey, actually, this is a pretty useful tool in our repertoire. Let's do something with this. So, what people did this first?
Okay, so the novelty side of this had gone all the way back to Rome. We actually have not I'd say working examples, but we actually saw like manuscripts of what they were, and they were basically these little steam jets that you pour water inside of it, and then you put a fire under it. It would literally just blow out steam, and it would spin itself around, and it'd be like, oh, cool, clap, 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 right? China had actually a few things like this during the Ming, because the great Ming that they were the pinnacle of their time, and then unfortunately they went to crap too. The people that start using this as a power source, and the big one that really takes it away, is people start figuring out how to use steam power to make a pump, and it is largely used to pump out mines. This is the big one that really starts taking off in an industrial sense. It is largely, I don't know who starts it first, but Britain, Germany, and France, all relatively at the same time, or very quick in succession, will adopt this and start using it. And this will largely become part of the United States, or will be adopted by the Americans as they become an independent nation and start their own industrial revolution. They're a little bit behind. This really comes out of Western Europe. There is a question on if it's not inspired by the Dutch, as the Dutch had the windmills and all this other kind of thing going. But these are the primary big three in Western Europe were definitely the pioneers of this. So Justin's having a quick conversation with the family. We'll get him taken care of in a second.
Sorry. We're good. Okay. Second question would be, well, you kind of already answered it. What was the first industrial use of this? You said pumps for mines. So I think we can move on real quick and get to the very exciting second industrial revolution. So what was the second industrial revolution, Tiberius?
Okay, the second industrial revolution is largely known as the mechanical force revolution. The reason why we separate 1 and 2 is that 1 is just the generation of power. This is basically coal-fired steam engines, but you can do a steam engine relatively rudimentary. What the evolution of this is for the second is actually getting complex mechanisms to do force for things that we're not used to, right? So you can do a steam-powered engine to get a steamboat. You can get it to do, a train locomotive. That was pretty rudimentary. That came out very, very early, and that really ran. And so that's not super complex. But what does get complex, and what people are using this for, is the modern appliances. This is everything from your washing machine, which will eventually use electrical power to power the washing machine, where this is using electricity, which electricity is actually has a lot to do with this, where those are used interchangeably. Mechanical force is used to make electricity, and then electricity is used to make mechanical force. But you can do it with steam. There was some prototypes for steam, but they were really dangerous. There is numerous things that you would innately not do with just ordinary steam power or human power. You would just washboard kind of stuff to wash your clothes. Well, now you have machines that will do it for you. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. What we see is a fundamental difference in how we operate. And the biggest one I will give you is refrigeration. What we are allowed this to do is that basically we use mechanical principles with these new mechanisms that we have built out to do things that we've never been able to do before. And this is cooling and AC and refrigeration. If you don't know how an air conditioner or a cooling unit works, is basically it's used to take heat out of one place and ship it out to another place. And that's using refrigerant. But it's using I'm not going to say complex by any means, but general rules that use mechanical principles. So When you put something under pressure, particularly a liquid, it tends to release heat because it's more dense, and the density means that the molecules are bouncing off each other really, really quickly, which means it wants to give off heat. This is why if you pressurize air, it's really hot. It's actually not that you're making it warmer or injecting heat into that mix, although there is sometimes where you can do that as you run it through that system. It is that the air is so compressed that something that was 70 degrees is now 90 because it is now so together that it's radiating more heat because the energy doesn't have room to expand elsewhere. It is bumping into each other. Basically, pressure doesn't make heat. Pressure makes the transmission of heat easier. And so what you do is that when you want to get rid of your heat, you pressurize it and it releases heat. And then you run it through a system and you depressurize it and it'll absorb heat. And that's basically on a general level how air conditioners and refrigerators work. When it's in the place you want to cool, you depressurize it, you let it expand, and it will suck in the heat. Then you shove it through a unit and you pressurize it massively and it will want to dump the heat. And you run it through a radiator and it will do that. Certain refrigerants work better, but that's a general principle. Another one, just as another quick example, is like the transmission in your car. Taking force and applying it on a general level is one thing. Now, we've known how to do this for years, for decades, millennia, is the changing of mechanical force, where you can use rope and pulleys and you can, use your hand muscles to lift way more than you think you should, thousands of pounds. But the difference here is that you're using gears and ratios, which we knew how to do, but on such a scale that you're able to make this way quicker, way easier. You use gears to machine new gears. And what you're able to do, for your car transmission, is that you can have a primary input power, which is your drive shaft, and then you can change how the ratio of what power goes out to the wheels. So you can have 1-to-1, which is actually usually fourth gear, believe it or not. You gear it down as you go because if you don't have enough power when you get off the line, you don't go anywhere, right? So you gear down, first gear. But then you want it more efficient, as in you're applying more power to the wheels, and it's now at a state where it isn't going to spin off out of control. So you go to second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear. My Mustang has 6. So the long and the short here is that it's all about gearing ratios. That's really, really complicated stuff to some degree. I'm not gonna say, okay, it is and it isn't. It's very, very basic. There's basic, but the long and the short here is that you have a primary input, you have a secondary, or you have a primary output. The difference is you switch the primary output depending on how much power you want to get out. So if you want a lot of torque and not a lot of power, or not a lot of top end power, you gear down so that you get off the line and you move really quick, or you start moving. But then if you want more efficiency as you get up into higher speeds, you gear up and you trade that torque for top end performance. It's generally how it works. It can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. So that's the second revolution in a nutshell, is mechanical engineering. This is the assembly line, cars, refrigerators, washing machines, the whole 9 yards. This is how all of this builds out into the modern world that we know it up until about 1970. We're going to get to the third industrial revolution here in a moment. This is what builds the middle class. For all the talk about unions and political power and all this stuff, which has some points, I'm not going to say it doesn't. The reason why you see such a difference between the agricultural world beforehand and what comes into the industrial economy is this. In agriculture, not expressly today, but moreover as the general, you either were unskilled labor who worked on the land, who tilled it, who managed it, and you might get some skills as you build up, but it really didn't demand any kind of increase in pay, and you were largely poor, and quote unquote, you were the peasants of the day. Or you were the landowners. You either ran the show, you did the accounting, you paid the workers, you were the guy on top, which did require an education, required skills, required connections. That's basically feudalism in a nutshell, although there's a lot of details to this, right? But the big issue with this is that there is no middle. But in the mechanical manufacturing world that was built out is that there is a middle. There is a functional middle that you can use out. So you can take somebody who knows jack nothing, you can put him on an assembly line and tell him to do one specific thing, right? Just turn this wrench, put this thing on, you're good to go, we'll pay you for it. Doesn't command a high wage, but it's very easy to train somebody on. There's your bottom row. Your mid row is people who can do multiple things, and then what eventually happens is you get to understand the principles and mechanics of whatever you're working on. So, eventually, if you work enough places on the assembly line, you kind of figure out how the car actually is put together and how the basic principles of the car works, and you become a service technician, or, somebody who basically would be middle class. You're not only could you be a foreman, which would be like, a certain, like, an oversight where you train up the new guys to do the new things, but what you would be largely responsible for is that you would be responsible for final assembly. You take the radiator, you put it here, you put your drive shaft in, you put your engine in, and you know how it all works. And that's how you become like middle management and middle class in that kind of economy. And there's plenty of jobs that are middle class for that. It takes people, you can build the condenser in a refrigerator and be low skilled, but when you put it all together and you got to line up all the pipes, you got to be pretty skilled for that. You have to know what you're doing, and that demands a higher wage than what is average. And that is one of the primary reasons, if not the primary reason, of why we have a middle class, or did. And of course, you can have your top end. You're going to have your factory owners, and you're going to have your designers. You have to know not only how all these parts work, but you have to be able to be like, all right, cool, we're going to add this, we're going to subtract that. That's your top end. So that closes out the second industrial revolution in a nutshell. That is why we had a functional middle class. That was why the modern world that we used to know is no longer the case. We'll talk about why that is in the third industrial revolution, but that's why what we were so used to now is becoming a problem. Go ahead, sir.
All right, so this is pretty easy. So when did the second industrial revolution really kick off, year-wise?
It really kicks off not terribly long after the first, because they're really coincidental. If you want to say that the first industrial revolution starts really like in the 1780s when people start really experimenting with how to get power out of steam, I would say the second industrial revolution starts really around 1820. This is when people start using all of that power when they realize they can do steam pumps, and this is actually the first locomotives are being tried out literally that decade. They realize they can do a lot more with it. They can go, oh, hey, not only can I move from A to B, I can do mechanical transitions. Now, there is a conversation if the second industrial revolution actually started before the first, and that is industrial weaving is actually older than the power generation, and that is you could use like a water wheel, and they would use belts and pulleys and I cannot pronounce today, belts and pulleys and levers where you would have water power that would turn a belt, which you could, turn a bunch of power things where you could use that in a loom. And that's actually like back in the 1600s kind of thing. So that's not exactly new in that regard. And there's a conversation if they want to count that as part of the second industrial revolution, but where it really takes off to where you're actually using mechanical steam power and applying that into the loom itself or a sawmill or what have you, that really starts 1820s, 1830s, and it really takes off from there.
Okay. And you talked about how the second industrial revolution built out the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that, how do I phrase this? Would you say that this hurt any other certain class of people? Like for one to rise, one must fall. So who was hurt by the second industrial revolution?
So there was an era of change and transition because there was a lot of people that fell out of a job in agriculture. 90% of people were employed in agriculture when this started. When it was over, it was less than 10. Why is that? Well, if you have mechanical force and engineering, eventually somebody figured out how to do so many of these processes mechanically. You would have Well, the first one's the mechanical thresher, and that is a what you would do is you would go out you with a scythe, you would cut down your crops just like you would normally would, but instead of literally picking your seeds apart by hand, you could throw it in a machine that was constantly winding up gears against each other, and it would mash out the chaff, the wheat from the chaff. Actually, literally, that's where that phrase comes from, and that is how systematically it goes. I mean, this is just an example, but it would build out to basically in the 1960s, you would have they call it combine harvesters, is what it is that it would go through and you'd sit on the thing, and one dude could do the work of literally 80 people, where you just drive on this thing, and it would cut a bunch of wheat, it would shove it all through there, and then it would throw it through the thresher, and it would shoot everything out the back, and have all your wheat seed up on top. You just run it off to the truck every now and again. You're good to go. We still do that today. But start to finish, we would watch as the transition where all of these people basically would lose their jobs because the machines made it where they weren't needed. And so there was a lot of people who just didn't know what to do with themselves. Now, the good news is that while there was an era of pain and transition because people were like, what do? I don't know how to work on a factory. And some people just didn't and were first in early retirement. A lot of people end up doing, because it wasn't horribly hard to transition over to that. So basically, long story short, is that was there people hurt? Yes. Would they benefit later? Questionable. Let's just say most people who didn't grow up in that world had a hard time adjusting to working in an industrial job instead of an agricultural job. But the generations behind them would do so very, very effectively. And this becomes basically modern society.
Alrighty, then I guess that brings us to the Third Industrial Revolution. What was the Third Industrial Revolution, Tiberius?
The Third Industrial Revolution is electrical computing. This will start with this starts a way long time ago with the basic transistors. And to give an example, it was electromechanical computers in the Iowa-class battleships, where mechanically it was, a bunch of gears and levers that did a bunch of calculations, but you could electronically input calculations. And at first, that wasn't a huge deal, but it helped a little bit. Where it really takes off is thanks to the microprocessor in 1971, 73, something like that. They condensed something the size of a couple of transistor tubes and transistors, which could be the size of my desk, and they transitioned the operations that it did into something the size of my finger. When that happened, the world started changing. It was slow. It happened very slowly. But what this does, in a nutshell, is that when you program a mechanical instrument, let's go back to that drive shaft. Or, I'm sorry, not the drive shaft, but the transmission, real quick. Is that mechanically, you have the powertrain and you have the drive shaft the drive shaft and the power input. And then you have to input and output each and every one that you want for a transition. Right? So, first gear, if you want to go low end, first gear, second gear, right? What the electronic computing allowed you to do is that instead of having a stick shift, you could click a button and it would move it for you. So you don't have to do that. This isn't the automatic transmission, because the automatic transmission uses mechanical principles. But what you can do is that instead of having an array that takes a power input and only does what the mechanical output should be, I'm missing my words here a bit, and I apologize. What this allows you to do is that it allows power output in a way that is easily programmable. So, if you're trying to make a power output from mechanical and mechanical, you need basically a gear setup, right? In a ratio. So, you have like a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-1/2 or 1-to-1/2 that upscales your power, downscales your power, or you have what is a transitional lever of some sort. So if you want your power to oscillate, where it is it'll move out and then move back in, that will be something like your pistons, right? You need to mechanically build out to do that. But what electronic computing allows for you to do is that it allows you to take an input power and change it according to the computation that you insert into it. And that would be, if you want it to do up and down, instead of having to build a whole new gear ratio, you'd literally just tell the assembly of whatever it is that you're doing, go up and down. And that's actually a very basic program. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's how we do light displays is part of this. And there's 101,001 directions that this all can go. So why does this matter? Why did this change everything? Not only did it change in how we interact with power, but more importantly, it changed in how we did computing. This is basically the arrival of the personal computer and computations. That was really where it took off, but I wanted to illustrate the point earlier because it does matter. If you can make collecting data easier, so let's just assume you have a tax office, right? If you want to figure out where this dude, and this dude is, and how old they are, and where they live, you'd have to manually go through and search it. But with a computer, obviously, you literally just fire it up in an Excel sheet, you pull it up, and you're done. That drastically cuts down on man hours for organization, management, and distribution. And this is everything from the transition from, like Xerox machines and, stamp printers, all the way up into where we're at now with tablets. You literally just write on it, or, put your things, and you can see your whole inventory list. That's that fundamental transformation, is that everything, ease of information at your access at your fingertips. That fundamentally changed how we operate. Mechanical or electrical computing, as an example, it's really weird because it does so many things at one time, and I just can't put into perspective how much it does. But it allowed from everything from dry fly-by-wire planes and aircraft, where you didn't need mechanically to have like your ailerons and all that tied into your cockpit. You just had a wire, and you programmed the wire to, if it had a certain input, it would give a certain output. That's way, way easier than having a bunch of hydraulic lines and jacks that go all throughout the plane. It's way easier, way more cost efficient, way space efficient, way better on weight. This is why the aircraft industry is largely fly-by-wire, although it has backups. There was somewhere I was going with this, and I've kind of lost my train of thought, and I do apologize. I've ranted about this a lot before. The problem with the Third Industrial Revolution is that there is not room in a middle class for that. Is that it allowed for the service economy. And the service economy, yeah, it's cool. You're doing things for people. You're, basically doing accounting. You're doing, photographic development, which eventually went away because of that too. But you're doing all these things that mechanically just doesn't need to be done because the machines can do so much of it. This is robotic welders. This is all the assembly lines that literally just put the things together itself. There's no person needed. You just you hire a janitor, right? I'm thinking about how I want to say all that. The problem with this is that either you're a person who understands how the electronic works and how to build out from that, so you're either the guy who programs these computers, runs them, or owns the factory, or you're basically something that can't be done by a machine. And that is the problem that we're at today with the Third Industrial Revolution. The service economy has no room for middle class. There is kind of one, but it's very rare because teachers and doctors and all that largely require a level of expertise that puts them in the high category. And most of the time, your middle class folks are not supposed to be there. Either you are highly skilled, highly educated, and highly technically trained in the operations that you do. This is what we've seen with plumbers. This is what we've seen with electricians, is that you have to be really smart to understand all the things that are going on to wire up and, engage all this correctly. Or you don't know jack and you're flipping burgers. And I'm not, look, a guy who did 10 years in a food service, I'm not bagging on you, but there's no middle. There's no place to jump up to get all the way up. And that's where we're at now. Any questions?
So you say that this is the beginnings of the death of the middle class. I guess my question would be, if there isn't really a way to move up, then where does it leave society? Because, like, I guess stratified.
It becomes stratified again, and this is a lot of what we saw back before the first Industrial Revolution. Is that we're going to go back to an era that looks a lot more aristocratic. Is that there's going to be the wealthy and the powerful, but there's no way to get up and join them, because you can't have a generation that's poor, but their kids went to school and they actually can be middle class, and those kids can go to school and they can be rich. That's not, that lever of advancement is going away. And so you'll largely see the end of the middle class. Now, I don't want to go full doomer on everybody yet. We haven't talked about the fourth Industrial Revolution yet, and that's opening up new possibilities. We'll get there. But the long and the short is that the big part about, if this continues, in which at least this phase of it will, you will see societies become ever more economically, politically stratified. And that's something that scares the hell out of me personally, because that's how you get things like fascism and communism, is when people think that they don't have a way out.
Okay, let me try and think of a good question here for the third. Got it. I mean, you do a really good job. Every time I think of a question, you cover before you get to the end. So I'm like, darn, that was the question I was going to ask. You just answered it.
Sorry about that, but that means I'm doing my job.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess the only thing I can really do is say, what's the fourth Industrial Revolution? What's next?
Okay, so this has just started recently, and they're still talking about what exactly it's called. Here's the outline. They're calling it like the machine learning revolution. So those computers that you could program, they're figuring out how to make them program themselves. And that's a really big deal, because that means that those service jobs that you had, that the machines couldn't do because they couldn't learn how to do it, that's now on the table. And so these are the advanced robotics that we're seeing now, is that you can literally program, you can literally have a computer program the computer to study you and learn from your actions. And it's really weird, because in a way it's kind of artificial intelligence, but in a way it's not. There's a really good video by a guy named CPG Gray. I can't say this right. CPG Gray on YouTube.
I think it's CP Gray, but maybe there's a second G in there.
I can't remember. But anyway, there's a really good video from that guy, and it is Humans Need Not Apply. Go watch that video. It explains this in a great detail. And what this basically, it explains how machines learn. With a person, to teach a machine, or I'm sorry, for a person, you have to literally write in code on how a machine should learn. Or I'm sorry, not learn. You basically program it. You tell it what to do and how to do it. With machine learning, you can make you can tell you can tell a computer what you want to have done, and what it will do is it'll make a little program itself. It'll literally throw random crap into the code, just out of the blue, like completely like random number generator, just go for it, right? And what it will do is that it will make an iteration. It'll make 100,000 of these little programs, all with a little bit of a different thing each. And it'll throw it out. It'll test to what you want it to do. And then it will grade those little programs on how well they did it. It'll kill off all the little ones that did poor or that did worse. It'll take the best ones. It'll start again and build out from there. And basically, the long and short here is that you can program very binary operations. So if I have a picture of my left hand, I have a picture of my right hand, and you want to tell the computer this is the right hand, this is the left hand, I could program that, but that's actually really complicated, especially if you're doing a photo, because photos are weird. They electronically code in a very odd way. However, what I can do is I can make 100,000 bots really quickly that do something, and you literally just take the ones that seem to do a little better, and you build from that. You just say, all right, cool. Bots, test it, go, cool. We're going to add another 0 or a 1 into your code, and you build out from there, and eventually what you have, because you can do this literally hundreds of times a minute, is that you can build out a bot that literally makes other bots to do all of these things that weren't open to before, and you can do it in record time. And it writes its own code. The weird part here, and this is where things get completely out of hand, is that we have no idea what exactly it's doing to some degree. Paraphrase. Let me put it this way. We know what it's doing, but we don't know the code that's being written. And we'd actually have to go in and take it apart and then look at what the code is to understand what it's trying to do. And it's to the average computer programmer, it's nothing but gibberish. But it works. Through sheer random happenstance of literally just throwing enough crap at the wall, because you can literally do that, is that you literally throw 100,000 bots at the wall and you just figure out which ones seem to do a little bit better than the others. And you do that hundreds of times over a minute. You get super bots that go and figure out, this seems to have the thing that I want all the time. That's a 3. That's a right hand. That's a left hand. That's a right hand. That's a left hand. We have bots that do that. And believe it or not, there's bots that do everything from writing music to determining what the video or the podcast you're listening to now is. That if it was recommended by a bot that watches everything you do, and then based on what you do, recommends you more things that you might like. And the reason, constantly they're doing this, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or whatever you happen to be listening or watching this on, is that every time that you close out your computer or you don't hit the next button or what have you, or to go to the next thing, it says that bot failed, and it will go and take any of the bots that did get you to jump from one video to the next or one podcast to the next, and it will take that and then it'll have it go again. And it will test out each and every bot on you, and eventually it will find more and more and more of what you like over your accrued time of doing it. You may have noticed, I'm on the line a lot. The bots are really, really good at knowing what I like. Not always. So, like, sometimes it's a taste, right? Sometimes I'll be watching this thing. I'm like, I want to watch this one thing. And then it gives me 100,000 of it. And I'm like, I didn't really want that. But what you will notice is that you can literally be searching something on Google. And you're like, all right, cool. I read about this. And then I want to read about this. And the bot will know just by your patterns of what you look at, what you're probably going to look at next. And that's why you can type like 3 letters in and it will auto fill in for you. And you're like, oh, wow, they're totally listening. Sometimes I kind of wonder if they are, but more often than not, it's because the bot has learned what you're doing. And that's where the next industrial revolution is and going, is that anything that's a binary operation will be run by bots. They can't think, but what they can do is they can make rudimentary operations very, very easily. And so any decision that is a yes or a no, a bot can now do. And those bots will take over all of those jobs, right? So what's left? What's coming up? What's the new economy that's coming out of it? Because we've done service economy. People are thinking we're transitioning that. No, we're transitioning out of that. What it looks like, and this is just the preliminary from the last 10 years of what we're seeing, it's called the social economy. what is the biggest jobs that are taking off? Things like what I'm doing, Twitch streaming, podcasting. The long standard short is that this is probably a massive renaissance in entertainment. We are here to entertain you. I've got, memes here. Give me a second here. I've got Russell Crowe. Are you not entertained? Going on in my head right now. But what it is that what we expect, or at least I expect anyway, is that we're going to see an ever-continuing explosion of social jobs about entertaining you, integrating you into communities, and giving you interactions that you want. Now, this isn't specifically just social media, but this is anything from the information that you're watching or listening to right now. What I'm doing is part of that. That is YouTubers and Twitch streamers and vloggers and all that. That is part of the new economy. But there's also other things that people will be falling into. A great example of something that's kicked off in the last 10 years that people just don't seem to notice about unless you're really in the industry is it used to be called home movies. They're now called indie movies. I kept losing the word for that for a long time. I finally got it back. Sundance Film Festival, stuff like that. If you're not familiar with it, what it basically is that a few people get together and they make their own movies. And they're not low quality movies. They're good. They're, not all of them. Don't get me wrong. Some of them are crap. But you're going to see an explosion of actors and film editors and graphical effect artists. Computers now have allowed us to do high quality graphical work that was, back in the 1990s or, even into the early 2000s that, were part of the special effects. We can do that on your home computer with a couple of hours. If anyone wants some examples of this, one of mine, I'm a Star Trek fan, Star Trek and Axanar. If you haven't looked at it, Axanar, it was a 20-minute film fan movie they put out. The effect shots are great. And it's all done on literally under $1 million budgets. This is part of the new economy that's coming. I'm not going to say it's all of it, but it's part of it. Is that you're going to see indie films. You're going to see indie television. You're going to... Okay, and not quite television. It'll all be through the internet. But on your TV, you're going to see productions like what I'm doing or what other people are doing that are, come off as professional, that we were doing with a high-end budget with hundreds of thousands of dollars back 10, 20 years ago. But now people are doing it with 4 people out of somebody's home or garage. And that is going to be a lot more normal. So here's the big question. Does that allow for a middle class again? Preliminary says yes and no. The no is that there's a lot of people that don't really fall into the middle. There's a lot of people that are like, hey, I'm making, $100 or $200 a month off of my Twitch or my YouTube or whatever, but it's not enough to pay the bills. And there's so many people out there that you just kind of get meshed out in the weeds. But on the other side of this is that, there's these very, very prominent people like Destiny or Vosh or whoever the hell else. I don't really care for the big names in the industry right now. I really don't. But the long and the short of what those people are is that they are kind of the rich upper class. They understand how to do editing, or they contract it out to have people do that work for them. What we're going to see, most likely, is that those who are on the bottom rung who don't really make enough will probably be involved in some other industries, and they'll do this on the side, or they're just really bad at it and they're just trying to hack it and they can't, because there's always this kind of people, right? But those who are on the bottom rungs that can actually pay the bills, they'll be relatively poor, but they can do it. They're basically like video gamers, that kind of thing, where they've got a personality, but they don't really have, or maybe like they're really good at games or some kind of thing, where they'll attract enough of a crowd that they'll be like, oh, here's $1,000 a month in subscription fees. They'll barely be able to pay the bills, but they can. The middle of this will be people who either have a assortment of skills that understand, hey, look, I can do editing and I can do processing and I can write a script and I can do all these things, rub it all together. And while that is a full-time job that takes, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, depending on how good you are at it and how methodical you are, is that you can make a decent living with this. You can make let's just say $40,000-$60,000 a year off of that kind of job. There are people who can do that. There are people who do that now. There's a lot of YouTubers that do that, and there's a lot of Twitch artists that are going up into that. And then you're going to have the creme de la creme. Now, I'm going to argue that we haven't seen hardly any of that yet. You have your big names out there, whether they're Instagram artists or whatever, but that's nothing compared to what I think is coming. You're going to have institutions that are going to come up using the online media and these tools that are going to rival major production companies in quality. So, you know what? ESPN, cool. There's going to be a bunch of people that get together to talk about sports, and they're going to have a whole network. So they're going to be like, you're going to have a person that's like directing it and figuring out where it's going, and they're going to be like, all right, cool. We're going to have this guy on and this guy on, this guy on. We're going to pay them to be on, and they're literally going to be able to build out their whole networks. I'm starting to see that form out. Not going to give out any names, but there are political institutions that are building out to do that. There is communities that are building out to do that, from tech and gaming to sports and leisure and all this other stuff. This is going to be the big time, the norm. This is the multi-million-dollar stuff where Dr. Pepper is going to come in and say, hey, look, your network is cool. You've got multiple shows and content that I can get on board with. I want to advertise for you. We're going to pay you to do it. That's what's coming. You're going to see the death of television and mainstream Hollywood movies to a large degree. Like, there will be a few of them there, but it's going to completely revolutionize. It's not going to be a dude in, Hollywood doing this. You're going to see a network built out from, a guy in his garage in Columbus, Ohio has a studio in Atlanta that brings them together like 3 different actors, builds a show, with another show being produced out of Seattle, Washington, with a few guys there, and he just manages the whole thing. That's what's coming. Part of that's already started, and so that's where we're going. Now, there's a few things that I can tell you I still can't see coming yet, but that is going to be the vast majority of the economic potential that's coming down the road. It is going to be about your entertainment. Are you entertained? And so, with that bombshell, I think we're going to start closing this out. We're at 47 minutes. Justin, what questions do you got?
Okay, I got a couple. Let's take it back to the beginning of the 4th Industrial Revolution conversation. I just wanted to note that I think it's interesting that we're moving from an industrial revolution where we make robots that we study how to make robots, that now we're making the robots to study us, which is an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah.
The robots studying you. So just to a quick little description, are you essentially saying that the way that these machines work is kind of like I'm not sure if you know the infinite monkey theorem, where, if you make a bunch of monkeys type random stuff forever, eventually they spit out the entire works of Shakespeare's The Idea. So these robots just spit out random stuff and eventually just works. If you have enough robots doing it quick enough, eventually you get the thing you're looking for.
Unironically, kind of yes. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that is like kind of the ridiculous level that we're dealing with, is that it's really, really easy to make a computer program that says make 100,000 different programs. It's not hard. And basically, just put it this way, right? You can start with this as an example. I'm going to build a program. It starts with a 1 or a 0. And then I'm going to tell it to add another 1 or a 0 as part of the code. And then you tell that program to do that ad infinitum until you get what you want that program to do. Well, the good news is that bot can make those in literally not even a 1/10 of a second. And then it can send that to be tested. And it'll do that not even a 1/10 of a second. And then it'll evaluate which one of those did better, and it will build out from there. And so in the time that I just talked to you, that bot has now done 100,000 cycles of that code, getting it more complex each and every time that it did it. And by the time I have finished this podcast, that bot will be able to do the rudimentary thing that you told it you wanted it to do for the evaluation. It literally is throwing so much crap at the wall that eventually something sticks.
and it's kind of like the idea of survival of the fittest. So, you take these bots and take the bottom 50%, out of here, get them out of here, and then
It's
you take those top 50%.
It is literally computer Darwinism, unironically, and I mean, good thing computers aren't people, or otherwise, like shit would hit the fan. But no, it's literally is just all right, cool. It can be anything from a very rudimentary bot that does a little bit better than the other one did, and you literally just build out from there. And half the time, it is literally happenstance. But for anyone that's in my audience that doesn't believe in evolution, sorry, we do here, is that it's basically electronic evolution on hyperspeed. And so you make basically survival of the fittest. These did better. Kill off all the ones that didn't. Take them, reproduce them, change them, mutate them, if you will. Let them go again. These 50% failed. See you later, guys. And you literally just build out from there. And you can literally do that hundreds of times a second. Holy crap.
Welcome to the electronic eugenics program.
Yes.
So now that we're on the fourth industrial revolution, just a general question, because you talk about like the entire course of human history, right? Mm-hmm. These industrial revolutions, first one was 1780s, and now you're talking about 2020. So that's only a span of like what, 230 years? Four industrial revolutions. So was it a matter of the first industrial revolution was just like the flint and steel, and that started the fire, and now it's just a rolling rock, or
kind of, yes.
Was this always happening before this, just in a much slower sense, and it's just hyperspeed now, where it's happening?
There's been a debate a little bit, and I brought that up with the second industrial revolution, is that we understand like how to mechanically multiply force, like with belts and pulleys and that kind of thing. But it became a completely different animal when we did power, and then it was just off to the races from that point. So have we done that for a while? Yes, we have. Is that going to change? That's a bit of a stretch, because we're kind of looking into the great unknown. I think I know where it ends, but it gets really freaky. So, if we need to tackle that, we've got about 7 minutes to do that if we want to. But was there any other questions? Was there any other questions we wanted to hit at?
Yeah, so I guess the one quick thing I would posit is I feel like the normie take of what you said of like at home entertainment, or like just being able to make rival what ESPN does from your garage being a thing. That type of thing, the obvious response is, oh, well, ESPN will just buy you out. They'll just buy out the garage thing because ESPN has a bunch of dollars, and they'll just get rid of it because it's competition. What would your response to that be?
That's going to be an option for a little while for some folks, right? Like, ESPN could come and buy you out, but like, as a given example, ESPN's been hurting like a son of a gun the last 5 years. Because everything that they did back in the 90s and the 2000s, you now can get on your computer anyway. You can look at the highlight reel. You don't need ESPN for that. You can look at the scoreboards. You don't need ESPN for that. That was what originally got them off. That's why they shifted to commentating. That is why they're like, oh, this guy's totally going to bend. It's literally personalities. Like, I don't really care for sports in ESPN. The reason why I literally did a bunch of research just to do this chat on that is that we watched things where it's just like, all right, so this was the highlight reel. This is what happened in the 90s with ESPN. And now it's literally this person, I think he works here now, Keith Olbermann, just being like, oh yeah, Danny played great. He was doing great. And we expect him to do, I think he's going to win in the next one. Like, literally ESPN is more of a talk show at this point than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's just talk show around sports.
The problem is that if you can do that and make money at it, you're still business viable. But quite honestly, with all the competition coming in, where anyone can do that with a sports podcast, with all that, they can't buy everybody out. And that's just going to eat into their margins. And that's why everything that I've heard, ESPN is probably going to go bankrupt in the next 5 years.
So it's more of a scaling issue of like, at first, it was viable, like, hey, yeah, one guy makes a sports podcast, we'll buy your sports podcast. But if you have 1 million people make sports podcasts, it's unviable to buy 1 million sports podcasts. Like, that's going to be
especially when they're getting in your bottom line. Yeah, especially when they get in your bottom line. Any of those 1 million are getting sponsors, or, putting advertisements. They're getting money that could have been going to you, which means your bottom line is getting lower, and that means you don't have the money to buy them out. So yes.
And then on top of that, you got to figure out which ones are the ones that are going to be successful before they eat into your bottom line. Like, oh, I think this guy is going to become successful, so I want to buy him out before then, which is incredibly hard to do if you're analyzing a million different shows. So, I just wanted to tackle that because I figured that would be the normie question to ask against the idea that you had.
I've been looking at Twitch at the Twitch chat just a little bit, just make sure that nobody was saying up. But there's the big question that people are asking, so I'm going to tackle it. Is Skynet coming? So far, there is no indication to make people think that computers can think. That doesn't look like it's going to be the thing. Now, it's going to be a little bit weird because the computers will be able to make binary decisions very, very well. But until they can make trimary decisions very, very well, which is kind of possible, this conversation isn't even on the table. Like, computers cannot think in the abstract. They can't think in that regard. They're not there's no possibility for them to do that. We'll see what happens with quantum computing, but that's a whole other conversation. That's why the social economy is going to be a thing. Yeah, a computer can write a music here, but it can't make a movie. It might be able to, theoretically, to, write some kind of a script, but it's not going to be able to act, right? And it might be able to animate to some degree, which a lot of them kind of do in a way, but it's not going to be able to take the directions in what exactly to animate. All right, is it going to be yellow? Is it going to be red? Is it going to be orange? Is it going to be purple? Wow, why does this ship look so weird? You're building a sci-fi thing, and all of a sudden, the black void is a white peg. The computer doesn't know how to, interpret art and taste and all that. That is why we're moving into the social economy, because computers just can't touch that. It doesn't have a sense of judgment. And until computers can do that, there should be plenty of jobs for everybody. Don't worry about that. There should be plenty of things where all these things are open. And I wouldn't worry about the killer bots. The only thing that actually worries about me is if they're going to build robot warriors and Terminators and Gundams. That actually is possible. But the only reason why that would go crazy is if somebody is stupid enough to program the killing machine to kill everybody. And that's probably not incredibly likely.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that's about it for me.
Yeah, we're actually really right about time. We pretty much nailed it. So I want to thank everyone for being a part, whether you are here for the live show on Twitch, whether you're watching this in the new suit and tie, or new dress shirt and tie, and Justin here on YouTube. If you're interested in picking up the positions, we're absolutely wanting that. If you have intro music that you would want us to put with, or stuff for the podcast, if you want to help us out, we'd absolutely be very interested to have that. The next episode that we'll be doing is we'll have a conversation with our friend Dalton Germach about what we talked about today. He's going to be talking about what he agrees with me, what he doesn't agree with me, or what he does and does not agree with me about. He's basically the antagonist of the show because he really likes to know things, and so it's going to be very interesting. But it'll largely be a conversation / semi-debate on what he thinks I got right, what he thinks I got wrong. And we've got a hell of a lineup coming up for you coming down the road. I'm just going to give you guys a quick rundown. So coming up after that, we'll be back to Another Nation. We're going to do a week opening slide where we're going to do Turkey, then Saudi Arabia, then Iran. And then we'll actually be doing the following week Germany, but that's going to transition us open into the energy sector, where we're going to talk about green energy and not green energy, fossil fuels. And we're going to have a conversation with our good friend Carl coming up at the end of that week, where we'll be talking about energy, what's effective, what's not, carbon use, where we go from here. We actually agree on a lot of things, but he is a massive nuclear expert. I love talking to him. He's great. You'll like him. I like him. That's what we got lined up. And then we'll have another country slew, which is the Scandinavians, which is Norway, Sweden, Finland. And that's where the schedule is now. So, on that note, I've been Tyberius D. I've been joined by Justin, content director here at Geopolitics for Tyberius D. I thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one, guys.